got burned.
Why did Alexander didn't go from that buildings on his horse? If he was lost, why did Alexander didn't go from that middle of the buildings, on his horse?
Well, first of all, he didn't have a horse because his horse was killed in a battle. And he wasn't in the middle of any old buildings. He was lost in the middle of a vast desert full of orange sand with only a handful of men. But they didn't have any water. My lord, all hope is lost. It seems your mighty army shall finally be conquered. Not by the Persians, but by our own greed and gluttony for water. This helmet contains our last supply. O king, I believe your wisdom shall save us all. What?
Why?
Well, because there wasn't enough water for all of them, and it was Alexander the Great's way of showing his army they were all equal.
It's stupid.
What would you do better?
Because Alexander flowed the water instead to give every soldier a little bit.
Take a look, it's in a book.
Read your books!
Alright, well, welcome to RYB. Apparently, some technical issues. Supposedly, I have 2 streams going, despite only having... It doesn't make any sense to me. Supposedly, there's 2 streams going. One is like an old title. OBS kind of hanged. It kind of crashed a little bit when I started, so maybe that's what's causing it. I mean, I guess I'm just going to leave it and then delete one of them. I don't really feel like restarting the stream. I could. But I mean, I don't know. 2 streams on different books. I don't know what that means. Well, I guess some people are here so we can continue. Today we were talking about Arthur Ferrill's The Origins of War from the Stone Age to Alexander. A cool book on military history. Covers the antiquity period mainly, and then a bit on the prehistoric stuff. And it really goes over in sort of a fine comb detail. Crashing OBS if no survivors. Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully people find the right stream. I mean, I guess, like, all right. So if you're not reading the chat on the stream and you're like in the other stream, like go to the switch streams if the chat on the screen is not matching the chat in your chat. If that makes any sense. So then you can know if you're in the right stream or not. Also, the title should be a giveaway, I think. I don't even know what's going on. Anyways, it covers mainly the antiquity into the early, obviously to Alexander is when the book stops. And it goes into fine detail about how these people fought battles and all the archaeological evidence and history and the writers and such. Very interesting. Mic check, is this on? 2 streams, yeah. I don't. We're breaking the conditioning, guys. I don't know what that is all about. My computer's just been like a little antsy. I need to restart it. So hopefully it doesn't cause too many issues. I mean, I don't need that much. I don't even know how that would be possible. Like, fucking, how would OBS even do that? I'll just delete the video. Wait, hold on. I didn't have Discord pull up. I'll just delete the video that is wrongly titled. I demand you ignore the subject at hand. Instead, talk about how Leo is lusting after Toad's sister. I saw that clip. Yeah, it was interesting. Oof. Okay, so hopefully we have a good number of people here. Hopefully the people who wanted to participate in chat are in the right chat and the right stream. Hopefully that's the case. All right. So I took notes, as I always do. They kind of read like history notes, or like a history class, because this is basically a textbook, which is fine. I mean, it's a well-written textbook. It's actually fun to read. I've read textbooks that are much worse, but it is a textbook. So, and honestly, I would suggest people to get the full sort of experience to just read the book, because I didn't like take notes on the specific battles and all the little details, which is sort of the fun part of military history, is like reading about the little details in reality. But obviously, I'm not going to like paraphrase exactly from the book every detail of every battle, because that would just be like me reading the book wholesale. I just took notes on sort of the concepts. All right, so chapter 1 talks about sort of an unexplored area of military history, which is the prehistorical stuff. The sort of early anthropology, only a little section on the proto-humans. What was the name for them?
Australopithecus.
Yeah, Australopithecus. So Australopithecus lived approximately 4 million BC, and they found plenty of archaeological evidence of them using animal bones as weapons. And then archaeological evidence of them using animal bones as weapons on each other. So imagine the scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that happened with some primates that were kind of like humans 4 million years ago. And then moving into more traditional Paleolithic times, we got a lot of cave paintings, we have early tools, and we have spear wounds on Paleolithic corpses. So if you go back to that era, you find Neanderthal corpses with spear wounds on them. You find cave paintings indicating people with spears and things, hunting and other such, and presumably some interhuman violence. And then the Neolithic period is when things really blow up. And so this is what the first part of the book covers. And he talks about how in the Neolithic period, there was a lot more stuff than historians generally tend to think. So historians tend to think, once recorded history starts, then like all these things start coming along. But no, according to the evidence at least, not only organized warfare to a limited degree, but like sort of siege defense exists as early as 1200 BC. So you have these settlements like the Cattle Hayuk and the Fortress Jericho. The Fortress Jericho, famous, of course, for its, as noted in history, the sort of Mesopotamian fortress rock, whose inhabitants were able to weather the storm of various raiders. But in South America, you have the Cattle Hayuk. So what they did is instead of having a settlement of like tiny little huts where all the individual families live in huts, they connected all their buildings to each other, and then they had like siege tunnels on top of their roofs, so they could connect to each other's houses with like ladders between their roofs in South America.
Yeah, the door for these things was like on the roof. So
yeah, and they didn't have a traditional door, so it's sort of like an early. It's like imagine like Rust. Basically, if you ever played that game, it's like a little survival simulator, Minecraft but with violence game, and it's kind of like that. So these people built their houses. They made it so you can only enter by a ladder into the ceilings, and they made it so you can pull up the ladders, and all the houses are connected. So if somebody gets in, they can just run to their other houses and defend themselves. Kind of a novel design to prevent people raiding. And then the author sort of posits this hypothesis that civilization didn't first develop purely because of agriculture. Of course, that came along with it. but that the threat of people running around with like maces and daggers and bows, bow and arrows especially.
With the invention of the bow, you get the invention of fortifications.
Yes. So once people you'll find cave paintings even before what the settlements that we talked about of humans with bow and arrows shooting at each other in formation. So like in a line shooting bows. And then there's another thing they talk about. So in a city excavated in Sudan, under the apparently belonging to something called the Kedan culture. So there's a site of a mass grave, and they find dozens and dozens of human corpses, and within the human corpses are sometimes 10 to 20 arrow marks. So like the majority of the corpses have like an arrow or two in them, and then there's some corpses who have like arrows pin cushioned or marking on their bone of arrows or arrowheads, pin cushioning them. And so this is like 1200 BC mass slaughter in 1200 BC, which is really interesting.
This was basically like a slaughterhouse. These people got fucked up.
Yeah. And so it suggests that a lot of the things historians think only really came around once people started writing things down have been around way before that. And the author just sort of talks about how the first military revolution was the invention of the bow, the mace, and the dagger.
And the sling.
And the sling, yes. So those 4 weapons sort of defined warfare for thousands of years back then. And they started leading to the earliest fortifications, like the Cattle Hayuk and Jericho and other sort of things like that. And it's very interesting how he goes over all this archaeological evidence and different things that happened. And then we move into the sort of the early Bronze Age history, which is also interesting about like Egypt and the Babylonians and the Israelis. And he sort of talks about it with the term Near East, which is a sort of a historian term for the Middle East. Let me read chat. I wonder if there were bucket people in those dusty days. Morning stars or weapon of choice. I don't think those were around back then. Okay. So he talks about how the Near East empires, although historians tend to balk at it, they may have been able to field, so like early Egypt may have been able to field like 20,000 men. And most historians will say that, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Like, early Egypt can't field 20,000 men. But that's sort of what he claims. And then they find the numbers in the historical documents that got some squeaky noises in the back. They find some numbers that's in my background. They find some numbers about the conscription and then other things that indicate that they did levy this amount of force, and they did have these logistical systems in Egypt that enabled them to have these large standing armies. And he goes on to talk a lot about that. So
like mostly Egypt would have like a core military, and then they would just like bolster it up with like mercenaries and conscripts when they needed them.
Yeah, they had a small standing army, and it's sort of its job changed. So there's 3. He talks about different nations in this section. So there's 3 sort of periods for Egypt, and anyone who like studies Egypt will know about this. It's the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom is sort of like just the beginning. There's very little writing on it, and historians sort of have to just speculate on things.
For the record, that's when the Great Pyramid and Sphinx were built. Was the Old Kingdom.
Nico, why DF are there 2 simultaneous streams? Because OBS bugged out and I can't end like one stream randomly, so there's just going to be 2 simultaneous streams. So you're welcome to either go hide in the other stream chat, I guess. You can do that. It's like a private stream chat, or you can go in this one and chat with everybody else. So Doggo's in the background. This will be a Doggo episode, don't worry about it. There'll be a lot of Doggo episodes from now on. All right. So the author talks about how early metalworking led to development of metal helms. So once you have a metal helm, the stone mace, which was the sort of the go-to weapon for millennia, becomes useless. And then they had to develop metal axes to counter the metal helms.
Yeah, that's one thing I found interesting, that they had stone hatchets, but they were basically useless for warfare until they became bronze. So,
Yeah.
that's just...
Well, the stone hatchets were too brittle to fight people. They would just like break or snap off after like the first hit. And so like metal axes were countering helms, and then they went on to like metal spears, and then rudimentary swords. But swords weren't that popular because bronze wasn't very good metal for swording. So they were sort of they were a ceremonial weapon at that time at best. It wasn't until the Iron Age that swords became anything of a relevant weapon.
Sorry.
Okay. Once the Bronze Age starts, there's this sort of arms race to, armor and weapons of countering each other in all the early developments. And the weapon technology that ended up being the most important for the early part of warfare was the chariot. And so they took the various chariots. The Babylonians had the first type of chariot, which they pulled with donkeys, which is interesting. They had like this chariot with a solid wheel, so just like a solid slab of wood in a circle pulled by donkeys, and they would have it was just really slow and cumbersome, and they would just have some archer or javelin on it throwing at people, and that would just be their chariot. And then the Egyptians and other people sort of, after encountering the sort of mysterious nomads Hyksos, the Egyptians had a part of their country conquered by these Hyksos people, and they were using chariots that used spoked wheels, and the Egyptians were like, oh, well, we can use spoked wheels. And then that's where the Egyptian war chariot came from, and then that spread all the way through all of Middle Eastern warfare. And so the chariot allowed... So you normally just had infantry lines, like throwing things at each other and slinging and like clashing in big old line battles. And the chariot allowed maneuverability, so like the first sort of cavalry-esque flanking. Yeah. And then it sort of became this whole thing with like, you have your line and you have your chariots. And he talks about some of the early Egyptian battles where certain pharaohs had to use their chariots in the same way that later commanders used it, in like having to break through the line and then encircle the enemy into your infantry line, and that's basically, that was like the basis of Egyptian pharaohs winning battles in like 1400 BC, and it like continued to be the basis of winning battles for 1,000 years, and even into Napoleonic times. All right, so bronze working enabled. Okay, never mind. We already talked about that. So going back to Egypt, the Old Kingdom Egypt, they had a defensive strategy. They built a wall along their southern border, and then they had like a small raiding party that would come and respond to anybody, or like a standing army that would respond to anybody that came by. There's some Egyptian historians who say like, oh, Egypt didn't even have any army because like they were just so geographically fortified. Epic. But obviously there's plenty of evidence that's not the case. They had a standing army, and that standing army would respond to various people invading the Nile borders. And then after that, they had some problems with the Hyksos people, and then that was the Middle Kingdom. And so the Middle Kingdom's like, and then they developed this sort of strike force and the logistics to maintain it. And so this Egyptian Middle Kingdom strike force, they go from Egypt, and they go around all the neighboring areas where the nomads who are attacking them live. So like the nomad strongholds, nomad bases. They just go around and beat and kill them all, and then go back to Egypt. So sort of like a mobile attack force, but not really made to hold anything, just to go out and attack anything that is threatening the area around Egypt. And then the New Kingdom, which is the sort of the late stage Egyptians, were obviously like a full-style imperialistic force.
Yeah. The author calls it the grand strategy, basically your foreign policy and how it changes and stuff.
Yeah, and that one is much more in line with the rest of historical grand strategy, where you make allies with your neighbors, and then you have an army that crushes opponents in a decisive battle. They sort of just fell in line with everybody else, but it was It was definitely one of the most organized armies for that time period, the Egyptians. In comparison, the Babylonians and Sumerians didn't have much of a standing army. They had sort of the mixed arms of like skirmishers, chariots, and other things, but they didn't have like a big old army. They were constantly at war with each other, and they were constantly having to fight people for various reasons, and so there was never too much of a huge standing army that either the Babylonians or Sumerians really had to throw around. And then it talks about the Israelis a little bit. So the Israelis were a much smaller nation, and it gets into this later in the next chapter when it talks about the Assyrians. But during the power vacuum, when the Israelis were making their moves, so like the time of King David, they would use ambush tactics mainly. So they would have this tiny guerrilla force ambushing the camps and sallying forth against these larger forces, trying to really get a decisive morale victory. And so the Israelis did that, and then they integrated some later technologies like the war chariots. So it's speculated that David was the one who integrated war chariots, and then maybe Saul did as well. And they were able to use their various tactics to hold some strongholds, and then the Assyrians came by and they got screwed over. The Assyrians just had way more numbers and fucked. And so then
the Assyrian was my personal favorite part of the book.
The Assyrians are interesting, yeah. So obviously that segues into the next chapter, which is the Assyrians. So the Assyrian were like a minor regional power. Fucking doggo barking episode. Oh no. The Assyrians
they were a regional power up until about like a little past 1000 BC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Babylonian and Sumerians were sort of the big dogs for a while. I mean, they didn't have like the huge imperialistic armies, but they just had a lot of money and a lot of troops that were just around the area, and so they were the big area. And then that sort of declined 1200 BC to about 1000 BC, and the Assyrians became sort of the leading regional power. And then they had their first sort of big king, who was what's his name, Tiglath-Pileser.
Yeah, Tiglath-Pileser the First.
Tiglath-Pileser the First, and he goes on, conquers a large swath of land, but then things kind of go to shit after that. So a bunch of nomads from like these mountainous regions come in. There's the sea people who are speculated. I watched some. This isn't really in the book, but the sea peoples are speculated to be like sort of an offshoot of the Phoenicians.
Yeah,
and so there's these sort of Phoenician raiders. There's these mountainous nomadic people, and there's a bunch of just foreign barbarians. You know, the classic sort of, there's empire, and then barbarians come in and collapse. So there's this huge collapse power vacuum about like 1100 to 900 BC. And in that collapse, that's when the Israelis, the Canaanites, and the Philistines are like all screwing around and getting their territory. So when there's this power vacuum, when the Assyrians get their ass kicked, that's when the Israelis and the Canaanites are all fighting each other.
One thing about this was the time when the Bronze Age completely collapses. Like the sea people have something to do with it, but the whole area, the Hittites vanish. Like basically, like it goes like the Middle East.
It's basically like, it's a dark age that people tend to forget about, the sort of the Bronze Dark Age, and then during the Bronze Dark Age, various people in the Near East. And I think it started the Near East and then spread. Developed the ability to forge iron into useful weapons and armor.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts obviously the Iron Age. And so the Assyrians are the first people to form a sort of mixed arms. So you got skirmishers, you got chariots, you got sort of heavier infantry. And bows, and you make all that iron and you go forward. So the Assyrians were the first people to do that, and they found massive success, and they took over almost all of the Middle East.
They were a huge
after
empire.
900 BC.
They were also the first ones to use like single horse cavalry.
Oh yeah,
because up until this point, everybody used chariots, but they found out that it's actually easier. And like they can be more effective if you're like just a single horseman, because it's just a single horseman's harder to hit than a chariot. So, yeah.
Apparently, I'm getting a message from YouTube. It says something is copyrighted. That might be blocked.
Oh.
All right. Is anyone having issues? Well, whatever. We'll deal with this later. Hopefully, one of the two streams survives. I don't. All right. Anyways, you're on the other stream. You don't, and like chat is not reflective of your chat. Try switching. I don't know what's going on. It's just YouTube OBS. Everything's fucking up. Yeah. So the Assyrians they managed to have their combined arms and their iron weapons, and they take over all the Middle East, and they rule with an iron fist. And so there's this particular story. The Assyrians take everything over, and there's a city that rebels. And the Assyrians get there, and the city's like, oh shit, and the city sees like they have 100,000 men. And they're like, oh fuck, and the city surrenders. And then the king, the Assyrian ruler, just like flays a bunch of people alive, and then like staples their fucking skin to the walls of the city. So they basically use terrorism, like extreme acts of violence to keep people in line, kind of like the mafia style.
Yeah,
and
they were brutal.
They were super brutal, and this made everyone hate them, and so eventually they would get overthrown. But it kept people in line for a good amount of time, about like 300 years, maybe less than that.
Yeah, 250, 270 years.
What happened? The video got grayed out? Like, can you guys hear me? Alright, shit. So maybe the movie clip I used got, like, capped?
Yeah, maybe.
Fuck. I don't even know what's going on. Alright, so for people in the chat, can you hear me in the stream? Like, is the stream working? What's going on? Is just the video not playing? Fucking A. Is it over? Oh shit.
I mean, I have the stream pulled up.
Is it working?
Yeah, it looks fine to me. Hold on.
Well,
I'm gonna mute
everything
my mic.
works?
I'm gonna mute my mic and
Yeah, hold on. Let me. You can hear me talk. Okay, well, then what's the issue?
yeah, I can hear you talk.
Stream works fine. Then bug.
Yeah.
I don't know what bug behind you's problem is. Well, maybe if people were trying to reload the stream, it gets like cut out. Is it the copyright thing? Shit. That would be bad. Then I might have to actually restart the stream. All right. So somebody in chat. This is already kind of a shit show because the OBS bugged out. But bug is trying to censor you. Someone like unload the page and then go back and try to get back on the stream and see if you can. Try refreshing. Try VPN. Everything works fine. I might get blocked in certain countries because of the video clip I played, which would be like oof, I guess. I don't know. I really like that movie though, The Fall by Tarsem Singh, and I thought it was a good clip of Alexander the Great. I kind of screwed up the encoding. It was stuttering a little bit, but a little cool clip. Anyways, well, I guess we'll just continue with the 11 people who the stream is working for. And VPN. The people are just a gray bar across the stream. Interesting. Huh. Well, shit. I don't know what to do.
I mean, the stream seems to be working fine. Like, I don't know what the issue really is.
Yeah, let's keep it moving. I don't know. I kind of want to restart because it kind of would. I asked somebody to see if they could reload, and it might seem that anyone who wants to view the stream would have it blocked on their end. Maybe. Should be bad.
If you want to restart it, fine. I don't care.
Yeah, I might do that. Just restarting it for one person. That's what it's like. Alexander the Great had a horse that rode his ass. Oof. All right. Are you gonna check, Jose? Okay, we'll go with that. The stream's already been derailed by the tech issues. But...
Yeah.
Restart to fix your autism? It's not going to fix anything. Because then we'll have to, I'm going to have to, like, make it a coherent episode, so we're going to have to talk about, like, the same things again. I'll just have to not play the intro. It feels bad, man. Are you refreshed? It works? Okay, well,
Yeah,
I guess just fuck bug behind you then. Here's about that guy. Alright, we're going on. We're moving on. Enough of this. I'll fix this later. Alright. So the Assyrians were assholes. They flayed people alive. They put their skin on the walls. They ruled with an iron fist. And they had this whole interesting system of logistics, and that's it wasn't really the technology. I mean, they had good iron technology, but they had these really good logistics. So they had officials who worked right under the king, go all over around the empire to various villages and abduct horses. Edit this part out in post. F bug. Yeah. And yes, they had a specific person that worked under the king. They would go over to every village, and they would just collect horses for the army, and then they would send the horses for the army, and they would send a letter saying, okay, well, so this horse should go XYZ because it's the type of horse that's good for chariots, or it's the type of horse that's good for cavalry, and they at some estimates put it at 100 horses a day in a 3-month period, sent to the capital of the Assyrians, which is like a huge amount logistically.
Yeah. It's like nothing like this has ever been done before. So
yeah, and besides that, they have the stories of Sargon, the actual ruler, not the fat fuck YouTuber. So Sargon was actually Sargon the actual ruler, not the fat fuck, was actually pretty smart. He managed to go over huge swaths of land using kind of Hannibal-esque tactics of engineering to get his army into surprising geographic positions and then get the enemy to surrender. And it did this a lot.
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting story because he would it's like this is where he had to I guess surprise attack the mountain civilization Urartu.
Yeah.
And to get into the heart of the mountain, because there's no roads here. Like he can't get in, so he takes out half of a mountain, like literally mines it out, and then builds his own road straight into Urartu. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and sort of basically the same thing Hannibal did of just building a road right through your mountain in order to surprise attack your enemy. And and then he managed to get tons of military victories against all the Assyrians' enemies. But after Sargon, though, the all of the enemies of Assyria sort of got together and overthrew them. So the Babylonians, Persians, and Egyptians sort of killed all the Assyrians because obviously they had a bad reputation.
Yeah, everybody hated them.
Yeah. All right, so the Persian Empire sort of rose out of one of the groups of people the Assyrians ruled. It was a sort of this northern Iranian, sort of the area where Iran is, the sort of northern type of nomadic people originally, who then turned into the Persian Empire under Cyrus.
Yeah, Cyrus the Great.
Under Cyrus the Great. And so the Persians used similar tactics to the Assyrians, but they were much more diplomatic. So they would appeal to they said, okay, so as long as you join us, all you got to do is pay the tribute, and then you get protection, and everything's good, and you can do whatever you want, have whatever religious freedom you want, whatever. They were a bit nicer than the Assyrians, and so they had a really good sort of statecraft, sort of political organization, logistics, and they were able to field these huge armies, intimidate people, and that's how they won. So their technology was actually worse. So their technology in terms of a lot of things was worse than their vassals in a lot of cases. But they were just able to have such better logistics that they were able to field such an army that conquered other people.
yeah, at some point, like when the military itself is so big, you usually don't fight it, you know?
Yeah. All right. Okay, so where are we at? We are Persians. Okay, yes. The Persians had less technology than their vassals, but they just had really good logistics. And then they started using cavalry and the navy, and so the use of sort of skirmishing cavalry in combination with naval dominance allowed them to get huge swaths of land all over the world. And
yeah, from modern day Turkey to India. It was
so all the way from
huge.
India all the way to Turkey, Anatolia. And in order to facilitate that navy, the Persians took the... Jeff reading the side chat for relevant remarks? Yeah. What's that? They took the trireme from their Phoenician and Greek
subjects.
Yeah, and then they took this technology, and then they had the best triremes, and they sort of ruled the Mediterranean and forced a naval response out of the Greeks.
Yeah, so basically the Persians themselves didn't really have a navy. It's just the Phoenicians had the best boats, and they were just better on the sea, and so they would just basically hire the Phoenicians to do any of their naval battles.
All right, it feels like people might not be able to return to the stream because they get a copy struck or something. So I don't know. Hopefully that's not the case. All right, so moving on to the Greeks, I guess.
Yeah. This would be a good time to just say, like, the basic narrative of the book is that there are two lines of development that basically go into modern warfare, and that was the Middle Eastern's development and the Greeks' development. Now, the Greeks didn't develop as much as the Middle East did, but they did create one key thing, and that's heavy infantry, the hoplites.
Yeah. So and obviously when you read about the Peloponnesian Wars and other things like that, you'll see how the Persians got repulsed by the Greeks had a good amount to do with the hoplites. Not that much though. It was mainly naval battles.
Yeah.
But the hoplites definitely outclassed a lot of the infantry of the Persians. But the Persians overall had a better army, and if the Persian commanders were smarter, they would have easily been able to win.
Yeah, basically.
I'm insecure about what the stream of working like this. Well, I mean, I guess I could do part 1 and part 2. I don't know if I can. I don't know what happened. Like, I'm just getting all these messages from YouTube and just oof, dude.
I mean, I just reopened a tab to see if I could get in, and I can. So
yeah, let me just click on a link to my own stream, I guess, and see what happens. If I get copy struck. Greeks invented ass rape? Probably true. Alright, seems to work. Okay. So maybe some people are copy struck, which is a shame, I guess, but that's alright. We'll just have to live with that one. Alright, okay. So the Greeks had their heavy infantry formations, like the famous sort of phalanx. And what happened is that the Mycenaean Greeks were pretty heavily connected to the sort of Near Eastern Assyrians and Egyptians, who had the chariots, the combined arms, the different groups, the sort of the Persian style, basically. So the Mycenaeans and the Trojans were more emulating the Persian style, and then sort of the Dark Age happened that we talked about with the Sea People and the other nomads.
The Mycenaeans are basically like the proto-Greeks. that they go through their collapse and then they like come back as the Greeks, basically.
Yeah. Where did my phone charge? The author talks about how Homer, when he writes the sort of the account of the Trojan War, you can clearly tell that he's writing it in the Greek Dark Age, and he doesn't really know what he's talking about. So he'll write about like XYZ battle formation and such, and then he'll say like that the cavalry and the chariots are just used for transportation to the battlefield. Like not even realizing that chariots could potentially be used on the battlefield for like maneuvers and such.
Yeah.
And so this was sort of the Greek view of things for a long time, because they became backwards. They became completely isolated for everyone. They were just fucking backwards. And then in their sort of backward city states, they developed the phalanx. It just kind of happened that the phalanx ended up being like the popular mode of combat. And then it just kind of stuck, and that's all they had. And so they had all this other, like they would use cavalry because they just didn't feel it was the thing to do. I don't know. It's very strange.
Yeah, they didn't have logistics either. Like during when one of the Greek city-states would start warring with each other, it's like they got their food because merchants would go and sell them like food.
Yeah, merchants would just go along with the war bands and sell them food, and then they would decide to say, okay, we're having a war with each other. Let's all get to this flat field and run our phalanxes into each other, and then whoever wins is like the winner. It's like super honorable. It's basically like a sporting event almost, because of how sort of like weird and goofy it is. And sort of the Greeks are these just weird backwards people using these phalanxes, who have like this really interesting culture that's separate from the Near East. But besides that, they're militarily backwards, and it's honestly through sheer luck and like naval maneuvering they managed to repulse the Persians.
Yeah,
the phalanx helps a bit in certain situations, but it isn't what decides the war.
Yeah, the phalanx kind of it proves itself when it's the hoplites up against like light infantry.
Well, yeah,
like at things like the Battle of Thermopylae, where you can't use cavalry and such. It really proves itself, but on like a real battlefield where like you can outflank people, they got
like in the open field, they had to constantly use geography to their advantage. And when they were forced, and this caused a lot of problems, like them not being able to, having to cede certain things and causing specific city-states to be sacked by the Persians, and just like a huge amount of problems. And so the author talks like at length about the sort of the famous Battle of Thermopylae, and then the Peloponnesian War between the Athenians and the Spartans. And
the Peloponnesian War is really interesting.
Yeah, so basically, I think everybody knows most about the battle at Thermopylae and all that such.
Yeah.
And so like how that all happened and like the why it happened and sure we already talked about that, but the part that's much less studied is the Peloponnesian War. So after the sort of the Persians invaded, Athens sort of formed a league, and then Sparta formed a league. So then you have the Athenian League and they're under different names, but you have the Athenians and the Spartans with their different factions, and it's sort of like a Cold War kind of deal. So the Athenians
the
and the Spartans.
Peloponnesian League was the Spartans, and then
Peloponnesian
there was the quote-unquote Athenian Empire.
Empire, yeah. You have the Spartans versus the Athenians, and they have all their allies, and basically all of the Greek city-states and little countries have gone on one side of the either they're with the Athenians or with the Spartans. And there's like these tons of skirmishes, these little naval maneuvers, these battles that don't make much sense. And the Athenians and the Spartans are at each other's throats at like different parts of Greece for a long time. And then they finally just they keep like outmaneuvering each other and winning different battles and losing different battles. They decide on a truce for 50 years. And so they're fighting in these different little pitched battles, and some people are figuring out how to flank the phalanxes.
Yeah, this is kind of where the phalanx becomes like a little obsolete.
Yeah. So the what happened in sort of the late Peloponnesian War is that the Athenians trapped a Spartan force on an island and then embarrassed them and made them surrender. And this led to everybody. So the Spartans after Thermopylae built up a myth of themselves to try and like generate political power. And once the hoplite, the phalanx, like fell in a battle, sort of the political situation shifted in Athens' favor. and so then the Spartans were on the back foot for a while after this, but they managed to strike a telling blow using like a surprise attack against some of the Athenians' vassals, and then after that they negotiated a peace. But kind of like how the Cold War, it's not really a peace. The Athenians quickly go out and try to have like a frontier battle. So in Sicily, there's an Athenian, there's a Spartan-sided state that they want to like take over, and so they send like this big old Athenian force down all the way into Sicily with the navy, try and take over Syracuse.
Yeah, Syracuse was, by the way, the most powerful of the Greek city-states. It had the largest army, the largest navy, and it was richest because it was in like a key, like Mediterranean seaport. It was in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Yeah. The Syracusans, I don't know what the name for them is, but the Syracuse is definitely basically a very important strategic point to hold, and so the Athenians wanted to get that and get like a one up on the Spartans. And so they sent a guy over. They sent 3 guys over. They sent their navy, but one of the people, one of the generals they sent over was like suspected of being like a weird cult worshiper or something.
Yeah,
and
Alcibiades,
and then he gets there, and then they send another ship and arrest him. So like one of the main commanders who like had the plan for what they were gonna do, like gets arrested and sent back to Athens. And on the way back, he escapes and then defects to the Spartans and tells them about everything. So then the Spartans are like, oh shit, and then they send like some kind of like how the U.S. trains terrorists. They sent like some Spartans. To Syracuse to train them a bit, and then they later sent like a force. And so you have this sort of Athenian group who's trying to siege Syracuse, but the Athenians or the Greeks in general are like super bad at sieging anything.
Yeah,
and so it just becomes in this huge comedy of errors, and then eventually the Spartans fly down there on their boat. And then help join the Syracusan force, and then the Athenians get surrounded and murdered, mercilessly killed, or enslaved.
Yeah.
And so basically, the Athenians make a huge blunder by trying to go for this huge frontier that's really far away from them, and this weakening of them is like, oh, the Persians are like, oh, we can get back in here, and so the Persians strike a deal with the Spartans, which is funny. So the Persians will give you financial support and help you take out the Athenians if we get Ionia back. And so the Spartans strike a deal. They kick the shit out of Athens after some trial and error, and then the Persians get like the Ionian area back. And so the only people really left standing in Greece then are the Spartans and the Persians. And the Athenians lose, and Greece is still kind of backwards and behind the times at this point. So from this point, after this war, there's Greek soldiers who are like, okay, well, things aren't looking very economical here. What if we go work as mercenaries for the Persians? So
yeah, this is a fun story.
Yeah. So the Greeks who were fighting the Athenians and working with the Persians are like, okay, we're gonna go be mercenaries for the Persians, and they go help one
they get involved in the Persian Civil War.
Yeah,
they were led by a guy named Xenophon.
Well, Xenophon came later, but the guy wasn't another Cyrus, not the original Cyrus, but like a new Cyrus is trying to coup d'état. The Persian Empire, and so he hires 13,000 Greek hoplites to try and use like this like amazing shock force to the coup d'état of the empire, and he leads them all the way into the middle of Persia, and then the battle goes terribly, and they're forced to retreat all the way back to Greece. And instead of surrendering to the Persians, these hoplites, these mercenaries led by Xenophon, they make their way all the way back to Greece, and then eventually they rejoin up with Sparta when Sparta and Persia begin fighting. And the people these mercenaries who went with the Persians, they have all this experience about warfare and like Persian tactics and supply lines. And then Xenophon in particular, the guy who led them, writes about it. And this sort of becomes the manual for warfare for the...
Yeah, it's called the Anabasis.
Yeah, the Anabasis. It becomes the manual of warfare for the Greek city-states at the time, and inspires different leaders. And then there's some other developments, so like Dionysus in Sicily is fighting the Carthaginians and develops the catapult. And there's some other stuff, and then there's the Macedonians, which is sort of the end of the book.
Yeah, well, since Xenophon went back to Greece, he took all of like Persian methods of logistics, like organization techniques, how to organize a military, how to like effectively use like naval and land forces. It's called like an amphibious force, I guess. And they all like the Macedonians, they all like organize everything. They take all this information and they like integrate it into a single army, and it becomes like one of the best armies ever created.
So using all these lessons from the Persians, and then the heavy infantry of the Greeks, and some other things like training and logistics, they make an army that's even better than the Persian army, and they sort of engineer it under Philip II, using various things like catapults, the Macedonian phalanx, where they use long pikes instead of normal spears to sort of make it harder for enemies to approach. The skirmishers, the sort of companion cavalry, the horse companions, these like lance cavalry, which are super advanced for the time. And they combine all this into one big army, and then they manage to get the start off a jaunt into Asia. And they obviously everyone knows the rest from that. So Alexander, using this sort of synthesis of military technology that was built up from the Greeks, Persians, Near East, and so forth, goes back to Asia and takes everything over. And again, it goes over like how he used the sort of hammer and anvil tactics of cutting a hole in the line and getting a flank with the cavalry, and other tactics and other sort of general logistics and travel and requisitioning supplies and having a disciplined army and such. And then siege tactics, and combining everything to become this sort of unstoppable force that's able to go all the way to India.
Yeah, basically he proved that the phalanx, if it's supported by cavalry, archery, and siege machines, is basically the best army in the world.
Yeah. And then the author sort of ends the book talking about, he often talks about Napoleon at Waterloo throughout the book. And he ends the book by sort of doing a what if. Okay, so like, what if Alexander was at Waterloo with his army? And he kind of concludes that, well, he probably would have done better than Napoleon. Because, I mean, not only just sort of the matchup between like pikemen and musketmen, because musketmen are vastly overrated.
Yes, they are. He says that like musketmen didn't even aim; they just like pointed and shoot.
Yeah,
and
musketmen are accurate to, well, not even accurate, but like deadly to about 100 yards, but not even. They'll mostly miss that time, and like 50 yards, maybe you'll be wounded.
And like an archer is way more dangerous.
Archers are more dangerous, and
even like a sling is more dangerous than that.
And so the reason, and this is sort of an aside, it's not really the point of the book, but the reason that muskets were so popular is because you could just give any random fuck a musket and say point and shoot and teach him to reload, and then you can just conscript massive amounts of people and there'll be like an army that's like mildly effective.
Yeah.
So the sort of the author concludes that the highly trained in melee combat and disciplined and formation bearing army would be able to easily defeat the sort of the British conscript army at Waterloo simply by marching up to them and killing them.
Yeah. He says like there's no like middle-aged army that could stand up to the Macedonian army.
Yeah. So I'm gonna. Besides that, what were some other things you thought from the book that were interesting?
I mean, I'm just a history guy, so I like the book all around. I guess what I find most interesting is just like the little details he puts in it, like the like again, I mentioned earlier that the Assyrian part was probably my favorite, just because like they basically, like you said, did Hannibal tactics and just like destroyed everybody, like taking out the side of a mountain and building a road into like a mountain civilization and destroying it was just mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
That was the first time I ever read something like that, you know?
I mean, I've read about it when Hannibal did it with the Carthaginians, but obviously it's been around a long time.
Yeah, but yeah.
And for anyone who like is interested in this historical stuff, just read the book. It has a lot of more details about the battles, and then I'm not gonna like just recount page by page every detail about the battles in the stream. But if you're interested in that, then the author goes into great detail. And I just thought this was a good book that's a good overview of sort of the development of warfare throughout these periods, and just sort of general history of these periods as well.
Yeah.
And so if you want to brush up on your history for the time period of like Near East into Greeks into Alexander the Great, and for that like group of people, that group of civilizations, just read this book. It'll be interesting. You'll learn about different warfare things, have battles, sort of supplementing the different parts of it. And yeah, I think it's a good read. I'm going to end this stream shorter than usual because of all the technical issues. I'm not sure. Just in case, I don't want to go for like another hour in case the stream like is completely screwed up and unwatchable in terms of if somebody clicks on it and like just show it. But I think we discussed most of it. Anyone in chat want to say anything? Nice view count, Lamau, yeah. Supposedly some people got showed, but we'll see. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think the dual streams is kind of responsible.
And maybe the dual streams too. Yeah, like OBS fucked up. I don't even know what went on. Anyways, yeah. A lot shorter than usual. I mean, there's not that much to talk about unless I want to like read specifically the battle recountings, which is like whatever. I don't know. I could do that, but
one thing I did find interesting about this is just how in the Neolithic age and how he talks about like the role that warfare played in the creating of civilization. Just because not a lot of people go into it, but I think he pretty much proves his.
Yeah, I think the most novel thing that he proves is sort of the Paleolithic, Neolithic stuff about how historians have misconceptions about how warfare is going on and probably organized warfare was going on long before recorded history.
Oh yeah, I like how he tries to define what is war and basically says like for something to be war, it needs to have formations. You know, you need like a team of people. You need a leader, and you need to be able to.
A rank and file and a leader. Tactics. He basically said as long as you have a rank and file, it's basically warfare.
Yeah.
Someone asked, do I check the Google form? Yeah, I periodically check it. Usually, though, I prefer, see, after you fill out the Google form, you get a link to the Discord. And so, like, fill it out and then join the Discord. If you Because, I mean, I do the show on Discord. I could, like, do it on Google Hangouts or some other program. But I prefer to do it here, I guess. So I'll check it. But, if you want to get on the show, you get in the Discord. We can make arrangements if you ask specifically for non-Discord arrangements, definitely. Talk about books that way, but I do check it periodically. Let's see. Invite Leo to talk about Jesuits. Yeah. I'm all Jesuited out. He was posting to me today about a fucking Pope Francis and funny things Pope Francis said. It was interesting. All right, well, it'll be shorter than usual. I'm not sure exactly what the state of the stream is. There's like 2 streams. I don't know what the fuck's going on. We're just gonna end it early, so in case the entire thing is showed. And yeah, I'm gonna check. Thanks for tuning in.
All right.